is where you willfully mislead somebody, knowing that what you're saying is factually incorrect.
I think I lie very well for my profession.
What does a liar look like? What does a psychopath look like?
I just want to say I hope there's a lot of criminals listening to this. We'll be picking up some good tips. And good afternoon, Steve, and welcome back. Here we are.
Thanks, Brad. How you doing?
I'm doing all right, man. Thank you. Yourself?
Bit of a shoulder injury, actually.
Yes.
I had an MRI last night and just too much golf, I think. I don't know. But it's mobility's a little bit limited at the moment. The funny thing is my partner, as you know, is a surgeon.
Yes.
And she says, look, why don't you get something done about it? Typical bloke thing. I go, yeah, I'll get it done. And she goes, you've been complaining and whinging and moaning and bitching and carrying on for ages. Go get something. Go do something. And I had a...
Did she swallow a thesaurus?
She's pretty educated.
Okay.
And she gets a bit annoyed with me because she, this old man flu thing, why do men, complain about the flu and all that sort of stuff? I said, yeah, but it's not a matter of complaining. It's just a matter of we do flus well.
Well, that's open for interpretation. I suppose it's because we have never been tested for the harder ones. Anyway, I'm firmly on the side of Team Women there, so good luck.
Thanks for the support.
That's all right. So just before we start, I just want to I wanted to segue into a branch of lying that we've touched on, which is lying by omission. Right? But it's even more. It's more specialised than that. And I'll tell you that the story. I was talking to some old school friends, and I was reminded that I was sitting in class one day. Back in I think I was in year 10, whatever. And so I was about 15 or 16. And I was bored, and I was sitting behind my pal, Alfie, who was ostensibly the toughest kid in the school. And Alfie was Italian. He had like wiry, kind of oily hair. And because we were pretend Sharpies back then, we had tails, short hair and tails. And I had my cigarette lighter, and I just thought, I wonder what would happen.
So where this is going.
Yeah. And it was almost like I was out of my body watching myself do this. And I just kind of reached forward and casually set his head on fire, right? Because
you do.
It didn't just like catch fire, but this 2-foot sheet of flame shot up the back of his head. And so his head was on fire. And I thought, well, I've done the wrong thing, and we think a lot faster than we think. And I thought, I've done the wrong thing and I need to put his head out. And I thought, well, the only thing I can do is hit the toughest kid in the school in the back of the head repeatedly.
Get away with it.
So I start whacking him with an open hand, whacking him in the back of the head to put his hair out. And in the meantime, he's just caught a little bit of this, pain, followed by getting hit in the back of the head. And he's turned around and looked at me and he goes, "What are you doing? What are you doing?" "Oh, so I'm gonna kill you." And I'm thinking, he's probably going to kill me. And then he looks at me, and I just looked back at him and I went, "Your hair went on fire." Right. So
he didn't know, he wasn't aware.
No, he wasn't aware. Well, you wouldn't until you've been set fire to, Steve. I don't think you know. You don't have anything to compare it to. Even if
like a Michael Jackson episode.
Well, yeah, but even if you've got brothers, you probably, you wouldn't go, "Oh, it's happening again." And but my lying was, I said your hair went on fire, which was factually true, but I left out how it happened.
That you torched him.
Yeah. And I could even say, like, with plausible deniability, I could have said, under questioning, I could have said, did you set out to set fire to his hair? And I go, well, no, not really. I thought of it more as a scientific experiment. But anyway, my point is that and he saw the lighter in my other hand, which I hadn't had time to hide
And
anywhere.
he could smell the scorched hair and skin.
He's looked at me, smelled the hair, looked at the lighter, and just went, oh. And it got slightly worse because
now he's pissed.
Well, yeah, and not only that, but he was lining me up to, to punch me in the mouth, deservedly, I'd say. And he's lining up to hit me, and the deputy principal happened to be walking past the room, and I looked into the room and saw him lining me up to belt me, opened the door and goes, "What are you doing?" And so he got into trouble. And he didn't grass me up. So anyway, it was just things didn't go well at recess for me.
I've got a great example of lying by omission. I was always interested in hypnosis. Year 12, year 11 I think it was actually, and I went to school with the guys from Pseudo Echo, and Brian Canham and a couple of the other, Piero Gigliotti and a couple others. Anyway, I picked up a book on hypnosis, and I actually hypnotised Steve Wasdrum, one of the classmates, to sing, I think it was a Peter Allen song, when the school bell went off. And sure enough, the school bell goes off and he goes into this terrible rendition of When My Baby Goes to Rio.
I know.
Only problem was Sue Ferguson, the maths teacher, was behind and looking and thinking, what's going on here? And some bright classmate dobbed me in and said, Van Apperen, or Aspro was my name back then, slow-working dope, hypnotised him. And next minute I'm being dragged in to the school principal's office. Jean Cruther, her name was, and the lying by omission thing is where you edit the information that you're supplying the person.
Yeah.
Right? So you're technically not lying because, like I said in earlier episode, lie is when you willfully go out there and mislead the person knowing. But my theory is if you give them less information, then technically you're not lying because you're omitting that information. So anyway, she says, "Did you hypnotise Mr. Wasdrum?" I said, "No." Now, technically I did, but she said, "What happened?" Now, we're going to talk about this a little bit later. It's all about how you question people.
Right.
I honestly believe there's no such thing as a bad interviewee, but there is such a thing as a bad interviewer because they don't look at all the signs and they don't ask the right questions.
Right.
And so simple yes and no or closed questions don't elicit a lot of information, whereas questions that do are more open-ended. So tell me, what time, what did you do? Why was Steve singing When My Baby Goes to Rio? Ask open-ended questions, not closed-ended questions. And the reason is that gives me more data and more information to work with.
Right. Well, okay, I'll give you another example of me as a student. Our school PE teacher, Mr. Winiarski, Polish guy, was in the school teacher's common room, and he said to another teacher, "Isn't it interesting?" I won't do his accent, but isn't it interesting that Brad Oakes's notes are all signed by his father? And this other teacher said, "It's very interesting because he doesn't have a father."
Oops.
This is all transpired, and so at lunchtime I was over the back of the Oval with the bad kids, and I hear Brad Oakes in the principal's office. We all, and I go in there and I'm confronted by the school principal, Miss XX. Don't know her first name, and she had this really big desk, and it's covered in notes, right? Because I didn't know they kept them, and they're all signed by my father. And she said, "What's the meaning of this?" And I was, because if I didn't feel like doing PE, I'd just write a note, and I just sign it with my dad's name. Well, we hadn't lived with my dad by that stage for about 5 years, right? And anyway, so. I guess that's lying, but you talk about people interviewing people, but I just want to tell you what they did was they said, "Okay, here is a letter that you have to take home to your mum and get her to sign it to acknowledge that you've been lying." And I went, "Right, okay." So I take it to my mum, And so she signs it. They said, yeah. And I went, right. And so I just took it home and signed it with her name and took it back. And then from then on for however long, I just wrote notes, and if I didn't want to do PE or whatever, I wrote a note, just said, and signed her name until they caught me. All right. Brado's to the
Which inevitably happened.
Yeah, Brado's to the principal's office. And so I go in
Again.
there, and I'm, same scenario, confronted with all these notes on the desk. And she said, this purports to be your mother. And, because by then I'd been pretty good at her signature. And I said, okay. And I said, I suppose you're going to give me a letter and I'll take it home, going to sign it. And I went, oh, no, we're not stupid. We're going to send the letter home and we're going to mail the letter.
So you're going to sit and wait for it.
And then we're going to put the Camberwell High School logo on it. And I went, how stupid are you? I get home before my mum. And so I wrote another note. I haven't seen this. Anyway, look, and so I acknowledge to our listeners, yeah, I was a liar, but I was a teenager. And
what teenagers don't lie.
Exactly. If your teenager doesn't lie, I'm sorry that your teenager doesn't exist. So anyway, that's
it sounds like they should have sent those documents to Document Examination Centre and done a handwriting analysis, and they would have seen similarities between. But with these documents, usually question documents, a lot of frauds I've worked on, you need the actual document that is signed, but you also need a comparison. So in that case, it'd be your mum's signature to see how close. Did it look pretty close to you?
It was very close. And in fact, it's even a joke in the family that our writing is very similar because my mum had terrible writing and I learned to replicate it. And I don't know if you can read that from there, but it's
look like a doctor's handwriting.
Well, one of my doctors actually said to me one day, she said, you have terrible handwriting. And I went, are you allowed to say that to a non-doctor? I mean, what? But yeah, and it stemmed from the fact that I learned to replicate it because, look, in terms of deception, okay, and I'm just not painting myself in a great light here.
No, but, keep going.
And if I didn't feel like writing a note, if I turned up to school and didn't feel like doing PE, there was a milk bar that stocked bandages specifically for me, so I could buy a bandage and I would bandage up my hand and just go. I played footy on the weekend. Oh, you can't. This is the same PE teacher who shot me. He goes, oh, okay. Well, you obviously can't do PE. By God, I could do a good one-handed bandage. Yeah, it's just. I don't know if it's happened to you. Again, there's a lot of lying that goes on between teachers and students because there's hierarchy and there's structure and there's governance. And I didn't realise, and this was a very big breakdown for me. I was about 14, 15 years old, and I said to a teacher, I was explaining why I didn't think we have to do homework. And she said, well, why don't you debate me in front of the class? And I said, all right, I will. So the next day I came in and I debated her in front of the class. She would have been about 35, which is quite old when you're 15, And I realised that she was lying. And I realised that I was beating her in the argument. I was beating her in the debate. And my world collapsed, right? Because then I realised, never mind when you find out Santa Claus isn't real or the Easter Bunny is just your old man in a fat suit. What happened for me was all these structures that were in place fell apart because I realised that so many of them were based on, people saying, well, it's not because it's true, it's because I said. Anyway, as poor me, and I turned out a comedian. Who would have thought?
I've got a bit of a war story about fraud and lying. I was a detective at Flemington, and
Flemington, which is what just in the northwest inner city, Melbourne.
And the uniform guys got called to a job, a rape, And anyway, I get down there and there's a single rose on the dashboard, but the windscreen was smashed. I'm thinking, right. So I go and I said, what's the story? And they said, well, this girl said that she'd been sexually assaulted by this stranger, but didn't have any details about who he was or anything like that. And so I spoke to her for a little while and I said, what's the story on the rose? What's that? And she said, well, I think it might be my ex. I said, well, why would your ex break the windscreen and then leave a rose on the dashboard? And she says, oh, no, he's been stalking me. I said, right. So she goes into a bit of detail about the sexual assault. And she says, I kept a diary of everything that's happened over the last 3 to 5 years. I said, right. I said, do you mind if I have a look at that? She said, yeah. So I'm looking through the diary and sure enough, there's all these notes and stuff like that. But I noticed in the last 2 pages, the second last 2 pages, they'd been torn out. And I thought, Now, document examination have what they call an ESDA machine. And what it does is, I noticed you were writing on your pad before. Mm-hmm. If I take that top page off, I can take it to an ESDA machine. They put I can't remember, they put plastic and carbon and this weird looking thing goes from side to side. But you can bring up, several pages under that from notes. Document examiners use it.
Sorry.
Anyway.
So this is the sound of me just tearing up my page.
Yeah, that's the one. And so I said, do you mind if I take this as part of the investigation? She said, yeah, sure. So I take it to document examination section. And by the way, the previous notes detailed everything that this guy had done to her sexually against her will. And anyway, I get a phone call from the document examiner. He says, oh, Steve, you want to come check this out? So I go back in those days. I think it's still a forensic science laboratory in McLeod. So I drive up there. And what's happened was the boyfriend or her partner found a new girlfriend, left her, and what had happened was in those 2 pages, she made notes of how she was going to plot to get him back and fabricated this whole sexual assault thing.
Oh, wow.
And so I ended up charging with make false report. But, of course, the technology, even back then, was quite, compared to what we've got now, it was quite prehistoric. But, there's a particular example of where you have to create the lie, then you have to maintain the lie, and you have to sound believable and credible in that process. So what was her motive? Well, her motive was, revenge based on the fact he found a new partner. So, you often have to, like your example of, fabricating your mum's notes, you've got to look at the motive behind that. What is the motive that generates that behaviour? And I've always said, a lot of investigators I've trained over the years, is if you can work out what the motive is, it can only make you a better investigator and interviewer. Because good interviewers, sure, they're good at observation skills, but they're good at asking the right questions.
What are the principal motives?
Revenge, anger, jealousy, lust, finance, gain, financial gain, saving face, all those type of things.
Would thrill be in there as well?
Yeah, absolutely. Any behaviour that motivates or drive could be a potential reason for that behaviour. So,
so it's all the 7 dwarfs, basically.
Well, yeah, pretty much. Yeah. Although sometimes, like the Erin Patterson mushroom woman, you look at contradictions there, because during the court case she said, she's very close to her relatives and that, but other evidence suggested that she was not as close to her in-laws as what she, and other than that, she tried to poison them. So
it's
an
indicator.
Yeah, pretty much an indicator. But as you may or may not know, poisoning is the number one methodology women will use to disarm or disable or kill their partners. And there's a pretty good logical reason why that is less fight, less blood and guts. But how she thought she could get away with that is even more interesting.
Look, there's delusion. How do people get away with, thinking? How do people think they're going to get away with cheating? And I think that kind of relates back to what was the story we were talking about last week about that dinner party, right? In New Jersey.
In New Jersey, yeah.
So we got a question from Tony Kelly about how that turned out. If you just recap.
Yeah. So what had happened was I was doing a number of morning shows throughout the States, ended up in New Jersey and got invited to a party, group of people there. And this one lady who had a few drinks under her belt said, "Oh, you're the human lie detector. You can tell if, I'm lying. Well, I'll test you. I've had an affair on my husband." And I'm thinking, right. And she goes, "Am I lying?" And like I mentioned last time, had to be really careful how I responded to that, because if I wanted her not to get in trouble with her partner or husband who was there, and I said, "No, there's nothing there," then and she knew, well, she probably would say, yeah, that's right, you're really good at what you do. But if I called her up on it and said she was lying, then look at the possible ramifications and consequences that would follow. Her husband would be angry, all that sort of stuff. So I thought, you know what, I'm just going to ask her, because I was quite intrigued myself. And I asked her a couple of questions. I said, "So tell me, why would somebody have an affair?" And she goes, "They're not happy with their husband." And I thought, oh, that's interesting, very direct, succinct. And maybe they've lost the love and the communication. I'm thinking, oh. So now she's providing, and the FBI teach interviewers this, look for use behavioural analysis to look for a potential reason why that behaviour occurred.
Yeah.
And she's just given me 2. And I haven't even started questioning her. So there's a bit of anger in there and all the rest, contempt, which is a micro-expression. And I'm thinking, oh, she's hitting all the buttons. But do I actually identify that she's lying? Oh, there's no doubt in my mind she was lying. She was, lying. She had. Yeah, she had. She said, "Oh, I had," but it was almost like redirection. So it was like, I would say, why bring up those comments? Why bring up, how the relationship is and all the rest of it? So I'm thinking, I think there was an element of truth to the fact that she was having an affair, but she was actually pretending that not.
Well, I was at a party in Adelaide. I was over for the Grand Prix. I was with some friends, and at one stage there was a very precocious border collie there, and I said to my wife's friend at the time, I said, "That's a lovely dog. Where'd you get the dog?" And she said, "Why did I get the dog? It's because Peter can't have children."
Wow.
Because she was just looking for a lead-in, I feel like that, your friend in New Jersey, and what I would have said to her was, if she said, can you tell if I've had an affair, I would have said, what we did was nothing.
It meant nothing to you?
Yes.
So you can see the consequences, though. I mean, what do we teach our kids? The importance of being upfront, truthful, direct, and honest. And you tell me the truth until they are, and they're criticised, castigated, and maligned. And there's the part of the social process. It's okay to lie, but don't hurt other people.
Yeah.
But as we get older, we lie for those reasons, to protect ourselves, save face, and so on. So, children, and we spoke about this before, Easter and Christmas, you lie to your children, yet you tell your children you've got to be honest with us. Yeah. So there's a bit of a conflicting, contradictory thing. So, and, there has been research where some psychologists will say that if a child doesn't have the ability to deceive, then they will be deceived themselves.
Yeah, I know, that makes perfect sense to me. I think that there's also an irony. I can remember being in trouble as a child, when I did live with my father, and being told, "You're not in trouble if you just tell me the truth. Nothing's going to happen." And I told the truth, and boy, did it happen.
Whack.
That's why I started learning how to do everyone's signature.
Yeah. Well, see, you think about it. I mean, I remember a number of years ago, I was in London and I ran a training course over there. And I show a number of videos, and these were not investigators per se. These were in the finance industry. So basically portfolio managers, investment analysts and all that type of thing. So I was showing this a number of these videos, and there was one woman in that group who picked them out all the time. I was blown away. And during one of the breaks, I suspected, I may have known why, but I certainly didn't want to approach it with her at that stage. Anyway, during one of the breaks, she comes up, she says, "Steve, you got a moment?" I said, "Yeah." And we start talking, and I said, "Look, I've got a quick question." I said, "I've been running training courses like this for years. I've trained profilers in Dubai, all sorts of stuff. And have you had any training in this?" And she said, "No, none at all." Now, we know that women have more evaluation centers in their brain, so therefore make them better at reading cues and signals and body language and all that type of thing. But she was exceptional and had absolutely no training, whether it be investigative training or anything like that. And I said, "Yeah, you've got really good skill sets." Anyway, it transpired the reason she was so good at detecting deception and reading body language was because from the age of 7 to 13, she was sexually abused by her stepfather.
Right.
And, of course, she saw the grooming behaviours and all the behaviours that led up to the sexual assault. So she became very savvy at reading those cues and signals, which made her better at reading people and detecting deception. And then she'd hightail it out of there. So there was a process where she'd become very good at reading behaviour for survival.
Well, that's a particularly heavy note and a very, very sad part of our society, but it did remind me of a very old joke, which, you're familiar with the Rorschach test.
Yeah.
When people know it as the ink blot test, right? And purportedly there's a psychiatrist showing this guy ink blots, and he says, "What does that?" And he shows him an ink blot, and he goes, "What does that represent to you?" And he goes, "That looks like two people having sex on a kitchen table." And he goes, "Interesting." He shows him another one. He says, "What's that look like to you?" And he goes, "That looks like three people having sex at a party." He goes, "Well, that's a very interesting response." And he goes, what about this one?" "Well, that to me looks like a man having sex with a horse." And he goes, "My God, you really do have a problem here. You really have a fixation with sex." And the guy goes, "Me? What about you? You're the one showing me all the dirty pictures." Anyway, nothing to do with lying.
We digress.
Yes. So you mentioned, what was the expression? Was it contempt was a micro expression? Did you say? Can you expand on that?
Yeah. So Paul Ekman, who is a behavioural psychologist, they created a show about him, Lie to Me, I think it was called. And, So what he did was he did a lot of research, and he wanted to, or what he did was actually created what he calls the facial action coding system. And what he did was dissected all the different musculature groups. And what he did was he could work out what the emotion, not necessarily whether or not the person was lying or being deceptive, but certain emotions indicated certain feelings, and that was displayed on our face. Now, as humans, we all exhibit the same facial expressions across cultures of fear, anger, happiness, contempt, sorrow, and disgust.
Right.
So you watch somebody, if somebody smells something putrid, their head will go back, there'll be a crinkling, the bridge of the nose, and often their head will go backwards, and there might be the display of teeth. So what he did was he categorized all these facial expressions, or what he calls micro-expressions, which usually occur within 1/100th of a second. So they're very, very quick. But they exhibit what somebody may be feeling. And the look of contempt is a unilateral movement of the lip to one side. So let's just say you're trying – yeah, exactly. So let's say someone's trying to sell you something and they're sitting with their arms crossed going –
Yep.
It's pretty obvious that they don't believe what they're hearing, but also it's also a look of disdain, and sometimes we do it. We don't. I see it all the time because it's obviously what I do. But it's like the other night I went and ordered a steak, and I said to the girl, I said, "What's the steak like?" And she says it should be pretty good. And when she said it should be pretty good, that's not telling me that it is pretty good. And I said, "Are you a vegetarian?" She goes, "How did you know?"
Yeah, I know that's your bugbear. It's I've been punched in the mouth for that very thing because I find it very difficult to, disguise my disdain. And I also think too, and this is a wild theory, that some people are better at seeing micro expressions than others. You know, I think that even just to get a little bit off the track there, that some sports people see faster. You know, they can see a
Reactions.
cricket ball or a baseball coming at them that we couldn't even possibly see. I suspect they're the people who punched me in the mouth because the micro expression, you know, the look of contempt on my face, and I don't, you know, I never thought to hide it because I never knew that it was there.
Yeah.
But just suddenly, whack, just king hit, you know, and it's usually had been preceded by somebody telling me a story that I thought was a bunch of absolute crap.
Sometimes I can watch surveillance tapes and I can tell you, even before the first punch is thrown, who's going to throw the first punch.
Yeah.
And it's the same methodology. I would walk into a boardroom and there'd be people sitting around the room and I'd tell you very quickly who the most senior person in that room is.
Yeah, yeah.
If that was you, how would you ascertain who the most senior person in that boardroom would be? What would you be looking for?
I'd be looking for other people to be slightly turned towards them.
Yeah.
Right? Just a little bit of waiting for the cue.
Yeah.
You know, because this is a very this is a read that you have to do with an audience.
Yeah, 100%.
I mean, I have this kind of radical theory in comedy that there are lead laughers.
Yeah.
You know, that there are people who make it okay for other people to laugh.
Oh,
and people take their cues from them.
Yeah.
But I was.
Do you work towards that particular audience member, knowing that other people? Because how many times you see on YouTube and that someone starts laughing and then other people start, it can be quite infectious.
Yeah, you actually can't, because if you do, you start to exclude
the rest of the audience,
other people. You just have to be aware of where they are. You know, if three of them were sitting together and there's no others in the room, you know, that could be problematic. But I was doing a gig for one of the branches of BHP, and I put together this. So I did comedy for them, right? But I designed the night for them, and one of the things I did was I did a trivia competition based on because there were about 40 middle managers and a senior manager and his crew, based on 4 teams, and they're all surf lifesaving clubs. So I made them put on stupid little, those little hats you tie on, right? Which was my way of just making everybody even. Right? But anyway, I'm doing jokes while I'm doing this, and they're not laughing, right? And so finally, I turn around to the senior guy, the CEO, and I said, "Look, I think this is pointless, because people often don't laugh at a corporate gig because they don't want to get caught out maybe laughing at the wrong thing."
Oh,
right. So they're always looking for that approval. And that's how I know about people turning to people. Anyway, I said to him, "I would, you paid a lot of money to get me here. I would get these people to laugh." And he goes, "Oi, all of you, start laughing." And they all started, and they just cracked straight away, and they started enjoying themselves, but they were waiting for permission. So to get back to your original question,
interesting, yeah.
I'm looking for, when I go into a room, I'm always looking for who people want the permission from. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does, very much. So it would be fair to say a good comedian is not just delivering jokes, but reading the room.
Oh, totally. Totally reading the room. And it's amazing. Steve Martin talked about how when he was at his, absolute zenith, he was doing stadiums and how impossible it is to read a stadium because
interesting.
He said the sound going out is hitting the back seconds after it's hitting the front, so the laughter's not coming straight back to you as well.
And the other problem with that, and this happens to me in public speaking. I do a lot of public speaking. Sometimes you're on stage and the lights are so bright you can't see the front members and the people on the first 2 or 3 rows. So you feel a bit disconnected. You don't know, and especially how far on stage. You'd probably hear roars of laughter, but sometimes it can be quite. You don't know whether you're hitting the mark.
Steve, I learned very early in the piece to duck under the lights to have a look, just every now and then to have a look. But wait until you've got people laughing, because you can learn so much from the set of people's shoulders. Like if you're actually doing a gig, and this is where people can't be deceptive. Right? If you're doing a gig and you're going to make people laugh, after you've made them laugh a few times, they'll just lean a little bit forward, right? Because there's a kind of, it's not a fight or flight or anything like that, but there's that kind of non-committal. Right? But once somebody's made you laugh 2 or 3 times, you go, this is all right. And you lean in. You watch that and you'll see that, because I know you get up and speak in front of people. You should look for that when you're speaking to people. You'll see just that set change. All right. But look, I think we have to wrap this one up. But I think it would be interesting if we could get more questions from people about, cheating. It's no, I don't want to turn this into.
When you mean cheating cheating in general or cheating on their partners?
Yeah, I mean cheating on their partners. Yeah. Well, I mean whatever they want to talk about, but we know that we've had a bit of interest about this, and
maybe we can talk about the cues in our next couple of episodes or what to look for.
Excellent. All right then. Well, until the next time.
Good on you, Brad.
Cheers, mate. See ya. I just want to say I hope there's a lot of criminals listening to this. You'll be picking up some good tips